They handed me a suitcase of rejection, but I kept the receipts.
6 to 8 years of sacrifice. And my own granddaughter said, "You're not family."
You're not family. That's what she said, standing there in front of gate A28, Detroit Metro Airport, humming around us like it didn't even hear her. She held out the suitcase like it burned her hand. Bright red, polka-dotted, light as air. But the weight it dropped into my chest crushed everything. I stood there in my old Ford jacket, fingers wrapped around the worn handle, watching her turn and walk straight through TSA like I didn't exist. Like 68 years of bloodline and birthdays and bedtime stories never happened. And the worst part, no one even looked surprised. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name's Frank Marino. I'm 68 years old, born and raised in Dearborn, Michigan, just down the road from the old Ford plant where I spent most of my life wrenching gears and hauling steel. I don't have much, never did. But I've got a quiet house, a garage that still smells like engine grease, and a lot of memories I wish I could unmake. It was 2 days after Christmas. Most folks were still hungover from eggnog and leftovers. Me? I was just trying to get back home. My granddaughter, Hannah, had invited me out to visit them in Chicago, said it would mean a lot to her. "We've got an extra room now," she told me. "Just bring yourself. We'll handle the rest." I should have known. From the minute I stepped off the train, I felt like a third wheel. Chicago was all glass and wind that cut through my jacket, but it was the silence that hit hardest. Hannah's husband, name's Mark, though he barely said it himself, gave me one of those half nods men give strangers in elevators. No handshake, no warmth, just obligation. The guest room was a storage closet with a cot, boxes stacked against the wall, a faint smell of paint and dust. They'd tossed a thin blanket over it like throwing a towel over a leak. The first night, they ordered takeout, Thai food, I think, and ate off paper plates while the TV chattered in the background. Nobody asked if I liked curry. Nobody asked if I was hungry. Mark scrolled on his phone while Hannah talked about remodeling the kitchen. I tried to offer help. "Need me to shovel the walk?" I asked when snow drifted across their steps. She smiled, quick and polite. "We've got it covered, Grandpa," which I later realized meant, "Stay out of the way." I told myself not to overthink it. Young people have busy lives. They don't always see what we see. I'd been the quiet helper all my life. Maybe this was just me being sensitive. Then came the airport. We barely spoke in the Uber. She sat on the right, I on the left. A gulf of black leather and unspoken words between us. Her face was lit blue by her phone, thumbs flying. Whatever world she was in, I wasn't part of it. The city slid by, steel and glass smeared with snow, billboards for tech startups I didn't recognize. We passed the old brick smokestacks, and I thought about the plant, about the smell of hot metal and oil that clung to me for decades. Those years feel ancient now, like I'd lived someone else's life. When we reached the drop-off lane, I reached for my duffel, the same bag I'd used since my first road trip with her dad. Canvas worn smooth, zipper replaced twice. She stopped me, reached into the trunk and pulled out a ridiculous bright red suitcase, dotted with white circles. It looked like a toy. "Here, this one's yours now." I blinked. "But that's not—" She cut me off. Her voice was flat, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "You're not family, Grandpa. Not anymore. Mom and Dad said it's time someone else takes care of you." Then the car door slammed, and just like that, she was gone. Taillights swallowed into airport traffic. I stood there in the falling snow, suitcase handle biting into my palm, throat dry as dust. The sound of jet engines roared somewhere above, but it felt like the whole world had gone silent. This wasn't sudden. This was planned. Somewhere between birthday phone calls and Christmas cards, I'd been moved from family to obligation. They just didn't have the guts to tell me until the very last moment. I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of strangers hauling roller bags and Starbucks cups. But I didn't fly either. I wandered through the terminal until I found a bench near baggage claim. People rushed past with gifts and coats and sleepy kids. I sat. My hands shook as I unzipped the suitcase. Inside, a few folded shirts, a pair of socks, no toothbrush, a dog-eared copy of Better Homes and Gardens from 2018, and an envelope. I opened it. Inside was a printed list. Retirement homes, 3 of them, all within 30 miles of Dearborn. Each one circled in blue pen. No note, no signature. Just a message, clear as a highway sign. We're done with you. I stared at it until the words blurred. My chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out. I left the terminal, dragging the suitcase behind me, wheels squeaking on slush. I caught the bus home. 6 hours of stiff seats and neon lights flickering against the window. A kid with AirPods slept next to me the whole ride, head bobbing, music faint enough that I could hear the bass thump. I stared out at the frozen fields and gray skies, at towns sliding by, nameless and cold. I thought about every late night at the plant, every overtime shift to pay for braces and bikes and prom dresses. I thought about Hannah as a baby, how she used to grab my thumb and giggle when I made the old Ford keychain jingle. None of it mattered now. My house felt colder than usual when I unlocked the door. Michigan winter crawled right in behind me. The heater hummed, but it couldn't chase away the ache. I set the suitcase in the hallway and just stood there a minute, listening to the silence. No laughter, no footsteps, just the tick of the kitchen clock and the groan of pipes. I made coffee, cheap grounds, burnt from sitting on the shelf too long. Sat at the kitchen table while the windows fogged from my breath. The walls around me were lined with pictures. Hannah in pigtails, missing teeth. Hannah on her first bike. I ran behind her, hands out just in case. Kindergarten, high school, graduation cap askew. Her wedding, I'd paid for the flowers, the cake, even the limo she and Mark rode off in. I remembered the way she hugged me that night, whispering, "Thank you, Grandpa. Couldn't have done this without you." I stared at her smiling face in those frames and whispered to the empty room, "Was I really just a bank account to you?" The words felt bitter on my tongue, like metal. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the garage instead, the smell of old oil and cold steel wrapping around me like an old coat. Stacks of folders and boxes lined the workbench. Decades of papers I never threw away because I thought someday they'd matter. I started digging. Bank receipts, mortgage co-signatures, tuition payments, car notes I'd paid off so my son wouldn't drown in interest. I found the check I'd written for Hannah's college fund, the invoice from her wedding florist, records of small, quiet sacrifices no one remembered but me. So many little ways I gave. They'd forgotten it all. No, they'd erased it. But I still had the proof, and proof is power. I kept the light on through the night, not because I needed it, but because the dark was heavier now. The garage bulb buzzed and swayed on its chain, throwing a pale cone of yellow over the concrete. Boxes cast long, tired shadows. The air smelled of oil, rust, and the faint tang of cold metal. Outside, the wind groaned through the eaves, rattling the siding like old bones. At 3:12 a.m., I sat on the floor among shoeboxes, file folders, and years of forgotten dust. My knees ached against the concrete. My fingers were cracked from the cold, knuckles stained with grease from some project long ago. But I didn't stop. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined my life. That I wasn't the ghost they'd made me into. And then I found it. In the bottom of an old Ford dealership envelope, the kind they'd hand you when you bought a car back when service still meant something, were the cashier's checks I'd written for Hannah's tuition at Northwestern. One for every semester. Memo lines scrawled in my old block letters. Spring books, housing, final year. The ink had bled a little, but it was still there. $24,000. every cent in my name. No repayment ever discussed, because I never asked for it, never wanted it. Beside that, folded neatly, was a notarized copy of the mortgage agreement I co-signed for her parents, my own son and his wife, back in 2009. I could still remember that year, layoffs slicing through the plant, neighbors selling tools just to buy groceries. My boy was terrified they'd lose the house. I picked up third shift overtime just to keep him afloat. They told me, "We'll take it from here, Dad," but they never did. I made 6 more payments that year, quietly. No questions asked. Just checks slipped into envelopes, mailed with calloused hands. There were photos, too. Me holding Hannah in front of the old Buick I rebuilt, her tiny arms looped around my neck. Me sanding her bedroom walls in their first house, sunlight catching the dust like gold. Me sitting alone at her college graduation, alone because her parents couldn't make it. I remembered clapping anyway, proud and small in the sea of strangers, and it all came back like a flood. I couldn't stop. They hadn't cut me off at the airport. They'd been cutting me out for years. One memory surfaced clear as crystal. It was a 4th of July barbecue, maybe 6, 7 years ago. The kind of day where the sun bakes the grass dry and kids run through sprinklers squealing. I'd spent the whole morning tending the smoker, rubbing ribs the way my wife used to, mixing potato salad from scratch. Everyone compliment the food. Everyone but Hannah's mother, my daughter-in-law. She leaned close while I set a tray down, her voice soft but edged. "You know, Frank, you don't have to keep showing up with all this stuff. You've done enough." Back then I smiled, thought she meant it kindly, thought maybe she worried I was tiring myself out. Now I knew better. It was the first shove toward the door, the beginning of the fade-out. I gathered every document and placed it under the warm glow of the desk lamp. One pile for tuition, one for the mortgage, one for gifts that had somehow turned into invisible debts. I poured myself a bourbon. 2 fingers, neat. The glass clinked against the workbench. I sat down, the stool creaking under my weight, and I started planning. Morning came gray and brittle. Ice feathered the edges of the garage windows. I hadn't slept, but I felt awake in a way I hadn't for years. First call, the county clerk's office. I asked about property deeds, voice steady but cold. After some digging, they confirmed it. I was still listed as co-owner on the very house I'd saved, the house where I'd been fed cold takeout and colder shoulders. I requested a printout. The clerk's keyboard clacked like tiny hammers while she processed the paperwork. My hands didn't shake. Next call, the bank that held Hannah's college trust. I'd kept adding to that account even after she graduated. Birthdays, Christmas, small deposits nobody asked about. Turns out the extra money had just sat there untouched. $22,000 still in my name. I moved it, quietly, efficiently. No announcement, just a quiet reclamation. The hardest call came last. My lawyer, Gloria Reed, an old friend from church days, retired now but still sharp enough to carve marble. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. She answered with a chuckle that cracked halfway to concern. "Frank Marino. Lord, I thought you'd finally learned to stay out of trouble." "I wish." My voice came out rough. "You okay?" she asked, instantly reading the tremor I tried to hide. I hesitated, then said, "I've got a mess, Gloria." "What kind?" "The kind where family decides you're done." Silence hummed on the line, then a soft sigh. "Tell me what happened," I told her. Not everything. Some wounds were too fresh to name, but enough. The airport, the suitcase, the envelope full of retirement homes. She was quiet for a long moment, then said gently, "Do you want peace or closure?" I stared at the papers in front of me, the checks, the mortgage copy, Hannah's grinning face and photos. "I want truth," I said, "and I want them to feel it." Her voice sharpened like a blade sliding from a sheath. "Then we'll do this right." We started with the will. I hadn't touched it since my wife died. Back then, everything defaulted to our son, Hannah's father. Because that's just what you did. You trusted blood. I changed it all. Gloria drafted the paperwork while I sat silent, staring at the photo of my wife on the desk. I removed their names, every last one. Instead, I left everything, savings, tools, the house, to a scholarship foundation for trade school kids in Wayne County. The kind of kids who fix things, kids who understand sweat and quiet sacrifice. Next, we filed to transfer my name off their deed. I never wanted their house, never cared about walls or roofs I didn't live under, but I wanted the moment when my name left in ink. I wanted them to feel the air turn a little colder when they realized the safety net was gone. Gloria smiled faintly when I told her, not cruel but approving. "It's fair," she said. "You're just drawing the line they drew first." When the papers were ready, I sent them by USPS certified mail. I wanted the green return receipts. Signatures, dates, undeniable proof. No one could claim ignorance. One envelope to my son, one to his wife, and one just for Hannah. Hers was heavier. Inside, I placed photocopies of every tuition check, every mortgage payment receipt, photos of the work I'd done. Quiet evidence, no long letter, no lecture, just a single sticky note in my handwriting. This is what family looks like. What you handed me at the airport wasn't. I sealed it. Pressed the flap down slowly, hands trembling but certain. Dropped it in the mailbox, watched the red flag go up, watched it stand against the winter sky like a quiet act of war. Days passed, long, silent days. I worked around the house, fixed a squeaky hinge, changed the furnace filter. But mostly I waited. The phone stayed still. The mailbox brought nothing but bills and junk ads. Then one morning, it rang. Unknown number, Chicago area code. I stared at the screen as it lit up on the counter. My chest thudded. I let it ring 4 times. 5. Finally, I picked up. "Grandpa?" It was Hannah. Her voice cracked like wind slipping through a broken window. I didn't know. I didn't mean—" I cut her off. Calm. Slow. "You meant what you said at the airport." Silence stretched on the line. I could hear her breathing, shaky and small. Then, "Mom and Dad told me you were struggling, that you needed a home." I laughed, low, raw, not kindly. "I built my home, Hannah, and I built yours. You just never bothered to ask who paid for the bricks." A tiny gasp, maybe a sob. Then a click. She hung up. I didn't call back. I didn't need to. Because now I had the truth. And soon they'd learn what it costs to lie to a man who only ever gave. A week passed. The snow outside turned to slush, gray ridges melting into the gutters. And the silence inside turned to stone. Thick, heavy. A silence that didn't just fill rooms. It seemed to press down on my chest. No calls. No visits. Just that lingering echo of Hannah's voice in my ear. "You're not family." Each morning I kept my small routine alive, as if routine alone could hold me together. I shoveled the driveway with my old aluminum scoop, the blade screeching against icy patches. My breath hung in the air like smoke. The sky stayed the color of dirty wool, and the cold bit deep enough to make my back tighten in protest. Neighbors waved sometimes, polite, distant, before slipping back into their warm houses. I'd give a half nod, not trusting my voice. Every evening I returned to the kitchen table and spread out papers like puzzle pieces. Receipts, property records, account statements, photocopies of birthday cards, my own handwriting scrawled across them, each one stuffed with a check. Always signed the same way. Love, Grandpa. I wasn't building a case for court, I was building a mirror. One they couldn't turn away from once they were forced to look. 2 days later, a letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope but carried the weight of a slap. The return address was my son's house, but the sender wasn't him. It was her, my daughter-in-law, typed, formal, cold. The kind of letter that thinks it's polite while cutting you to the bone. She was contesting the will, claimed I was being coerced by outside influences, claimed I was mentally unwell and emotionally unstable, said there was no way I could be in my right mind to exclude them from my estate. It was the most dishonest thing I'd ever read. And I've read a few lies in my day, pink slips dressed up as temporary furlough, letters from banks saying we value your loyalty, right before they take your house. This one stung worse, because it came with my last name on the envelope. I called Gloria. She picked up on the second ring. Frank, she said, brisk and alert, the way lawyers answer when they sense trouble. They're trying to contest, I said, voice low but shaking. Contest what? The will. A pause, then a short, sharp laugh, more like a bark. Let them try. Your paperwork is ironclad, Frank. The only unstable thing here is their entitlement. I should have laughed with her, but I didn't, because now it was personal. They weren't just erasing me from their lives. They were trying to rewrite my legacy. That night, I sat at my desk with the lamp burning low and typed something I never imagined I'd write. A letter to Hannah. It wasn't long, just the truth, poured slow and heavy like oil. You were the last light I held on to. When your parents turned distant, I kept showing up, not for thanks, not for recognition, but because I believed in you. And still, in the end, you handed me a suitcase. Not love, not understanding, just baggage. I've carried heavier things in my life, but that hurt more than all of them. What I'm doing now isn't revenge, it's just closing the book. I didn't sign it. Let her wonder if it came from me or from the ghost she made me into. The next morning I drove to the courthouse. The sky was pale and hard, sunlight sharp on the ice-packed streets. My boots squeaked across the marble lobby. People moved around me, lawyers with leather briefcases, couples whispering about licenses, a man arguing softly with a clerk. But it all felt far away, muted. When it was my turn, the clerk, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and a soft scarf, looked up from her screen. Sir? I'm here to file a declaration, I said. What kind of declaration? I slid the papers across the counter to sever any future claims against my estate. She read the heading, eyebrows rising just a little. You sure you want to file this? I met her gaze, steady, quiet. I've never been more sure of anything. Something softened in her face. She nodded, stamped the form with a heavy thunk, and slid my copy back. On the walk back to my truck, I passed the diner where I used to take Hannah after school. Same red neon sign buzzing against the pale winter sky. Same cracked vinyl booths visible through fogged windows. For a moment, I could almost see us there. Me sliding in with my coveralls still dusty, her backpack thumping to the seat. She'd always order a grilled cheese and a chocolate shake, swing her legs under the table, chattering about teachers and friends, the newest book she loved. Her laughter used to fill that booth like sunlight, but she never once asked about my day, never asked about the things I fixed, the machines I coaxed back to life, never asked what I dreamed for myself when the plant finally went quiet. I hadn't noticed then. I just smiled and listened. Now the booth sat empty, and the memory sat heavier than any engine block I'd ever hauled. Back home I put the papers away, locked them in a metal cabinet in the garage, the one with chipped blue paint and a stubborn latch. Then I opened a new folder. The tab read, Future. Inside, I placed the scholarship forms I'd requested. Simple forms, but they felt like building blocks. I wrote a check, firm strokes, no hesitation, signed the founding papers for a new fund, the Teresa Marino Memorial Fund, named after my late wife, the only woman who ever truly saw me, not as a paycheck, not as backup, but as a man worth loving. It felt right, like breathing after holding it too long. That night, I didn't sit in silence. I drove. Took the long road out toward Ann Arbor, where the freeway stretches wide and dark, and the radio turns into static if you twist the dial too far. The dashboard lights painted my hands in soft orange. The heater whispered against the cold. The wind slapped against the truck windows, but inside I was calm. Not numb. Calm. The kind of calm that lives under scars. Streetlights slid across the hood in long golden streaks. Somewhere in the dark, a train horn blew, low and lonely. I thought of all the nights I'd worked third shift, driving home just before dawn, with that same horn in the distance. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. But silence can be strength, too. The kind that waits, builds, learns, and when it finally speaks, it changes everything. I got the call the night before the snowstorm hit. Block number, late. My gut already knew who it was before I even swiped to answer. Some instincts are carved deep. I answered anyway. Dad? My son's voice. Stiff. Rehearsed. Like a man reading words someone else had written on a cue card. We heard about the documents. This has gone too far. I said nothing. He cleared his throat. The sound of someone trying to soften steel with water. Look, I know things got twisted. Emotions ran high, but you can't just cut us off. I let the quiet stretch until it felt heavy enough to bend the phone line. Then I said, low and even, I didn't cut you off. You handed me the scissors. Click. He hung up. I stared at the screen until it went black. Set the phone on the table. Didn't care if he called back. Didn't care if he rehearsed a better speech. Some bridges don't burn in fire. They collapse in silence. The next morning I dressed slow. Wool socks, thick flannel shirt, my oldest denim jacket, the one still crusted with drywall dust from Hannah's first apartment. Back when she'd called me excited because the walls looked so sad and she wanted them bright. I'd driven 3 hours with tools and paint just to make her smile. I buttoned each cuff carefully, pulled on boots still scarred from years in the plant. My hands were steady, though the room felt strangely alive, quiet but humming. Then I took the final folder from the kitchen table. It was heavy, though it shouldn't have been. Just paper and plastic sleeves. But it carried decades. Inside it, proof. Every check, every transfer, every signed line where I'd placed my faith and my sweat. Copies, not originals. I'd kept the real ones safe. These were for showing, not pleading. Bound neatly in a clear sleeve like a report card, because it was time they got graded. The house was exactly as I remembered. Brick front with shutters painted a cheerful blue I'd once helped pick. Wreath still hanging from Christmas. Slightly lopsided now. Fresh plow tracks cut through the driveway snow, black asphalt glistening like wet glass. I parked at the curb, engine ticking as it cooled, sat for a breath, feeling the steering wheel's worn leather under my palms. My heart thudded slow but strong. Then I stepped out. The cold slapped me awake. The walk to the front door felt longer than it really was. 30 feet stretched into 30 years. Each step crunching through the thin layer of ice. I rang the bell. The chime echoed faintly inside. Footsteps. Then the door creaked open. Hannah. Her face dropped the instant she saw me. Color drained out like someone pulling a plug. She didn't speak. Didn't ask me in. Didn't slam the door either. Just stepped aside. The living room looked like a showroom now. Fake logs glowed inside the fireplace. Electric. Humming faintly. A white couch sat like an uninvited guest, too pristine to be lived on. A Christmas tree still stood in the corner, lights unplugged, needles already crisp and curling. They were all there. My son, his wife, and Hannah, quiet in the corner, hands clenched in her lap. No hugs, no hellos, just a watchful silence. I walked to the coffee table, a glossy slab of wood polished until I could see the reflection of my jacket buttons. Set the folder down. This, I said, voice calm but clear, is everything. No one moved. I slid a hand across the top page, the plastic sleeve whispering, I brought receipts, I said evenly, not to guilt you. Just to remind you of what you forgot. I'd pointed to the first stack. Tuition payments. Flipped a page. Car down payment. Another. House saving mortgage help. Another. Birthday gifts. Christmas checks. emergency cash transfers. Each line read like a poem they'd never bothered to memorize. I turned to Hannah. Her eyes lifted slowly, wet and shining. "Do you remember when you called me from the dorm's freshman year?" I asked. "Crying because your rent check bounced and you were going to get kicked out." Her lips trembled. She started, but I kept going. "I wired you $2,400 that same day." I didn't say how I'd worked an extra Saturday to cover it. Didn't mention the double shifts. She nodded once, barely, eyes rimmed red. I kept going. "You remember the graduation party? You asked for help with the catering. I paid for the food. Every tray. Every plate. Every server." I paused. My throat burned. "You hugged me so tight that night. Said I was your hero." Her face broke then, just a crack, lower lip quivering. "Then," I said, voice soft but cutting, "I stood in an airport, holding a suitcase full of rejection." Silence. My son looked down, staring at the rug as if it could save him. His wife broke first. "You don't get to guilt trip us, Frank." Her voice was sharp, brittle. "Family's complicated." I turned to her, met her eyes with all the years she'd never bothered to understand. "No," I said, quiet but certain. "It's not. It's actually real simple." I leaned forward, hand resting on the folder. "You show up. You give without keeping score. You respect the people who built your safety net." Her face flushed, but she didn't speak again. I reached into the folder and pulled out 3 separate documents: the updated will, the scholarship fund charter, and the deed relinquishment signed and sealed. "These," I said, holding them out, "are final." I placed each sheet on the table with deliberate care. "You are no longer entitled to anything I've built." I let the words settle like heavy snow, then added, softer but sharper than any shout, "But you already took the best of me." No yelling, no tears, just paper sliding across polished wood, a sound louder than any argument, the sound of truth, of history reclaiming its voice. I stood slowly, buttoned my jacket. The room stayed frozen. My son's face was pale, caught between shame and pride, too stubborn to break. Hannah stared at the folder like it might burst into flames. I looked at each of them once, a long, quiet look that said what words couldn't. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm not broken." I let the silence stretch. "But I'm not yours anymore." Then I turned and walked out, left the folder, left the fake fireplace's hum, left the silence to do its own work. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, fat flakes drifting down slow and sure, swallowing the world in white. It was quiet out there, the good kind of quiet, the kind you earn. I climbed into my truck, engine rumbling to life. The windshield wipers swept slow arcs, clearing a view of their house, lights glowing behind drawn curtains, shadows moving but not daring to follow. I drove away without looking back. They had their last chance, and they wasted it. Snow hissed under my tires as I left their street behind. Headlights stretched out on I-75 like a silver ribbon, the kind you pull and it never ends. The night was black and clean, broken only by the pale blur of streetlights and the swirl of flurries tumbling across the hood. For the first time in months, maybe years, my hands didn't shake on the wheel. On the passenger seat sat an envelope marked "Filed." Inside, stamped court documents, notarized scholarship forms, and a short handwritten note from Gloria. "It's done. Live free." I didn't turn on the radio, didn't need songs or voices. Let the hum of the engine and the soft hiss of snow against the fenders be my soundtrack. That same highway, the one I'd once used to rush babysitting drop-offs, midnight rescue calls, frantic errands when someone needed cash or help, was now only taking me away, away from the wait, away from the noise. Back at my little house in Dearborn, the wind rattled the eaves, but somehow the rooms felt warmer than they had all winter. I stepped inside, boots crunching softly on the welcome mat, and closed the door behind me with a final, satisfying click. I walked slow through each room, fingertips brushing door frames my wife and I had set in place back in '78. Pine we'd stained together in the garage, laughing over who made the bigger mess. I could still picture Teresa, standing there in cut-off jeans and a bandana, grinning as she dabbed paint on my nose. She used to tell me, "Frank, you give until it hurts. One day, don't." I never listened, until now. I brewed a pot of coffee, dark, strongs, and sat at the kitchen table while steam curled into the quiet air. The walls looked different tonight, lighter, empty but not lonely. I'd taken every family photo down the night before, sliding frames into cardboard boxes until the plaster looked bare and new. Only one picture remained, held to the fridge by an old magnet. Teresa and me on our wedding day. She was laughing at something just out of frame, veil caught in the breeze. On the back, in her looping script, "Build a good life. Don't disappear in it." I ran a thumb over her words and let the stillness sink deep. The next week, the letters started to arrive. County clerk confirmation, the will changes were recorded. Bank statements, accounts moved, trusts emptied. A thick packet from the Scholarship Foundation. "Welcome to the Teresa Marino Memorial Fund." They'd already started the paperwork to help the first class of trade school students, mechanics, welders, builders, kids like I once was. One by one, every legal link I'd held to that family snapped cleanly. No arguments, no more guilt calls, no more manipulation disguised as concern. It was finished, and in the quiet that followed, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. I started venturing out more. Mornings at a little diner off Michigan Avenue. Chrome stools, Formica counters, coffee that could wake the dead. Met other retirees who talked about engines, fishing, and the Lions' eternal losing streak. We swapped stories about busted transmissions, first loves, grandkids who still visited and ones who didn't. I laughed. Real laughter. The kind that came from somewhere unguarded, somewhere alive. One morning, a waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile asked why I always tipped so well. I sipped my coffee, thought for a beat, then told her, "Because I can, and because I want to, not because someone expects it." She smiled wide, tucked the bills into her apron, and said, "World needs more folks like you, hun." That was the difference now. Choice. Giving because it felt good, not because it was demanded. Spring crept in, slow at first. Icy patches shrinking, robins daring to sing again, the air losing its bite. The garage door creaked open to warmer winds and the smell of thawing earth. One afternoon, I dug Teresa's old atlas from a box, big leather-bound, corners bent, coffee stains mapping the years, pages full of her little notes. "Stop here for pie. Best view if you pull over." I booked a road trip, not for anyone else, not to rescue, to deliver, to prove, just to go. Tennessee highways, down through Kentucky, into the Smoky Mountains, where mist curls over blue ridges and old country songs hum on static radio. I filled a cooler with sandwiches and cold pop, tossed a blanket in the back seat, checked the oil like I'd taught my son long ago, slid the map beside me, her handwriting peeking from its folds. The morning I left, the sky blushed with early spring light. Puddles shimmered on the pavement as I eased onto I-75 again. But this time, the weight was gone. Tail lights stretched ahead like a red river. The sun climbed behind me, painting the dashboard gold. Wind rushed gentle through the cracked window, cool but not bitter. And for the first time in decades, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I wasn't trying to earn my seat at a table that had been quietly pulled away. I was just driving toward whatever was mine to find. At a long stretch of highway, I glanced into the rearview mirror. No ghosts there, no suitcases, no silent expectations trailing behind. Just an open road, clean and endless. I thought of Hannah, of the look on her face when the truth finally landed, When she saw the years I'd carried for her, the cost she'd never asked about and never thanked. I didn't wish her harm. I didn't wish her suffering. If anything, I hoped she learned something. Something about love that doesn't keep score but still deserves respect. About the cost of taking someone for granted until there's nothing left to take. Because family isn't blood. It's how you show up and how you stay. The highway widened, welcoming me south. The horizon stretched open soft with morning haze. I felt something rise in me, not bitterness, not anger, something cleaner, relief, like a heavy load sliding off shoulders that had carried too much for too long. I rolled the window down. Cold air rushed in, full of damp earth and early spring. It hit my face and tasted like freedom. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't running from anyone. I was just leaving behind what didn't love me back, and driving, finally, toward a life that did. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.